Do you want me more straight on?
No, not too bothered. No, I think that's fine. This is the idea, is that we talk to each other about stuff.
Hi, Paul.
Hello, Shauna. All right, throw this topic out at you. Yeah. When you leave a job and enter the market, you have zero credibility. And I say that because you're a piece of paper. Nobody knows who you are. And you can only be represented by that piece of paper. You haven't jumped jobs that much, but you had 8 years in one business where you had a lot of credibility, and then you went to the job market and nobody knew who you were. You had no value to anybody. You went from being loved, liked, respected, useful, relied upon, an integral part of the process, of the systems, of the documentation, of everything, to being a piece of paper that nobody cares about.
Yeah. It was a very strange transition to realize that my value and my worth wasn't obvious. And that I wasn't like being headhunted. And I think having been at my last job for 8 years made me feel that I had a lot of value and a lot of worth, which I do, but that doesn't translate on a resume itself. Like, a lot of what I bring to a role is my personality, is me, is my drive, my connection with people, and so forth. So it was it was a little bit of a knock to my self-esteem, sort of coming out and realizing that I kind of needed to sell myself. I needed to upsell myself in a way more than my resume would, because that worth and that what value I could bring to a role and an employer, just, it's not obvious on a piece of paper.
And you touched on that. So how can you show self-worth on a piece of paper, or can you not?
I think you can. One thing I've found over the years in how my resume has changed is that I'm highlighting more skills that I have, like very high-level skills, rather than specific tasks I can do. And I feel like by highlighting my skills, I'm also highlighting what I value in my job. So what I think is important as a skill as well.
So are those skills, do you still list them as skills? Like, are you actually describing them as value adds in a sense? So when we talk about a resume has to evidence your ability to deliver those skills or make them useful to an organization, is it still a list of skills, or did you kind of write them as what their impact on an organization could be, or give an example of what their impact on an organization could be?
So I separated mine out to a list of skills, you know, like, I won't go into likes, but yeah, my list of skills. And then with the jobs that I had, I kind of put the products and the results that I got. And that kind of spoke to, well, those skills enable me to achieve this result for my employer and in my role. That's how I went about it. Okay.
Was that hard? Was that hard to actually go through that? Because you, everyone can put a list of skills together. And that's easy. That's almost like just going through a thesaurus or something. Or
I found it very challenging. For me, the challenge is I don't see myself as I am sometimes when it comes to what I'm capable of. So I did actually ask friends. I asked people that I used to work with, like, what do you think are my skills? And there were things that were mentioned that I wouldn't have thought about. I wouldn't have thought were something that I did exceptionally well, because I kind of took for granted that that was something that I did. Like, my ability to engage with different people around a business, a lot of people think that's quite an exceptional skill that I have, that I've built up, whereas I just thought it was my norm. So bouncing off other people to understand my skills was actually really helpful, because I don't think we see ourselves the way we are sometimes and the way others see us.
That's a really smart idea. I don't think I've ever heard anyone do that.
Really? Yeah.
Well, I mean, even I didn't think of it, actually. I mean,
you're welcome, Paul.
Well, no, I've been advising people to put resumes together for 20 plus years, right? And I like to think that over time, I get better at giving more useful advice, or the type of advice that I give is more evolved. However, I've never even thought about that? Because it's an obvious question, and people always want to help you, especially people you were close to, people you helped a lot, people who ultimately wanted you to succeed in that business, and probably you did, and they want to see you succeed in the future. Yeah. And I think you're right. When we sit there and think of it ourselves, we're kind of our own worst enemies, because we don't want to come across as though we're being too self-promoting, and so we may miss things. But other people who were business partners who relied upon us could remind us of something we did that was very useful, or what our influence was on a particular project, or comment on how we've grown in a certain area that they've probably watched and has been very useful to them, but in day to day, they're not going to sit there and comment on it as part of, day-to-day conversation. Yeah. So who did you ask?
I asked someone that I used to work with. He's still in the industry, and I'd worked with him for about 7 or 8 years. He'd come and gone from different jobs. I asked someone that was actually a rehab person, like occupational rehab, because I know that they're all nerdy about that kind of thing. And I just asked a couple of my just friends, offhand, what do you see as my strengths, and what do you see that I bring even at a personal level?
That's brilliant.
The other thing that I did was I used those personality tests like Myers-Briggs, for example, that kind of put words to what sometimes I feel like I can't articulate about what I do or how I behave.
So those personality tests where they'll put you in a certain category that describes how you go about your day, how you go about interacting with people, about managing tasks, whether you're the doer or the dreamer, the influencer, that sort of thing, the supporter. Yeah,
it just gave me another set of things to think about and go, do any of those ring really true to me? And actually, do I then use that in a really positive and influential way at work? And not all of them will be, helpful, but for me, it was about, let's get lots of ideas going from myself, from my friends, from someone I used to work with, from online. And from that, I could kind of take a more realistic view of what my skills are that I bring.
And then you can put it all together and pick out the best bits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
And the ones that are really probably relevant to the role as well. It's all good to say I'm really effective with communication, but what is it about you that is effective? That to me is the skill that you want to nut down.
Yes, demonstrating it.
Yep.
And even today, so I'm recruiting a role at the moment. I've told you about this before we started doing this. And it's a senior role. It's a 200K plus role, and the resumes that I'm getting from a lot of people who are leaders, and these are people who have been in 20 years, 25 years in the industry, had a few roles, and they're still listing skills. I think it's a habitual thing. It's a societal thing. I don't know if somebody's out there actually coaching people just to put words on the resume without actually qualifying them, but still people talk about, I've got great communication skills, I'm always on time, I'm all the things that we probably expect. Yes, you should have a base level, but the point is all these things they're different person to person. You ask anybody, have you got good communication skills? They'll probably say yes. Do you operate with integrity? Yes. People aren't going to put together a document about themselves to sell themselves, which says, I'm actually quite weak at my communication. Sometimes I don't turn up all the time. I'm often late because I sleep in quite a lot. I'm not very good at setting alarms, or I'm really bad with time management. We don't do that. So you have to then quantify it. Otherwise, it's wasted space. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Getting a little off topic.
No. I think when I think about resumes that just have that template look to them, I look at Word documents and I go, that's your fault, because you create these templates that people then just block data into. And I did look at my old resumes that I'd done over the last 20 years and think about how they were potentially being looked at. And, honestly, having spoken with you over the years as well, and other people that have gone through and paid for recruitment assistance in writing resumes, and that feedback around you have a millisecond when they look at your resume for it to something to catch their eye.
Yes.
And if it's 3 pages long, you probably lost them already. If it's, all these tiny little things. And yeah, for me, having a very concise couple of things around my skills is the eye catcher.
Yes, it is. And you're right. There's a very short space of time. So going back to the point in terms of creating as much credibility as possible, you've almost got to handhold the reader and lead them to something very interesting straight away. And I'll tell you, every person who is hiring, who reads a resume, the first thing they go to is, what's your most recent job? And is there anything interesting in there that makes me want to read on? And you've got about 5 seconds. If someone looks at your most recent job and it's just a list of skills or your job description, it doesn't matter what else is on there. They're probably going to just move on.
Okay, I have a question then.
Yeah.
What to you is interesting, like when you say that?
An outcome. Or So moving away from the job description to describe your time with an employer. So let's take you as an example. If you sent me a resume and you had 8 years with your last employer and all you did was put your original job description on there, all you're telling me is what you were hired to do before you started.
Yeah.
And it doesn't give me any indication as to whether or not you achieved any degree of success in the role. Now, spending 8 years shows you probably did.
Not always, but yes.
True, but I want to see what it was that made them keep you there and what it was that made them value you so much that they may have given you an extra role or greater responsibility, put investment into upskilling you and making you a more valuable part of the team. And that's where we talk about having achievements versus job descriptions and skills.
Yeah.
So if the first bullet point under the last role or the current role is an actual achievement, an outcome, shows your influence, shows how you made someone money, how you created a more optimized process, what you were able to achieve, whatever it is, then you've kind of got the reader. It's like an advert. It's like driving past a billboard and you have 5 seconds to look at it. Are you going to remember that product?
Yeah.
Amongst 100, 150, 300 resumes. And that's where you get somebody. That's where you gain credibility.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know like my first 10 years of resumes was a job description bullet point. Absolutely.
And that's what we're taught.
I had no idea.
We're taught that, I think, sometimes generationally. I think from our parents, perhaps, or from people who are probably more experienced further along in their career, especially if they maybe haven't looked for, let's say, what's 2023, 24. So if somebody hasn't looked for a job for 20 years and they joined a company in 2004 and they're a high level manager and they're passing advice on to somebody who's asked them to, I want to build a resume, I'm 22 years old. They may say to them, put your list of skills down, put your job description down, because perhaps then in 2004, that was more relevant. Yeah. That was how resumes were done. But again, that was more of an analog market. That's the year after I started in recruitment, where in London, people would walk in with resumes. They would fax them through. You know what I mean?
Oh, so you'd be given paper. Day.
Yes, back in the day.
Oh, I've handed them to bars and been like, can I get a bar job? Here's my resume.
And that's what we were taught to do. I mean, that's how I found my first Saturday job, going around town, handing copies of my resumes into shops, and eventually someone employed me. And now it's so easy. All the job sites and LinkedIn have a one-click apply approach. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to apply. So therefore, we get huge amounts of applications.
Yeah.
I'd say when I started in recruitment, we would rely more on databases, networks of who we knew, people who had walked in. So we'd have a candidate list that we'd operate from. But you wouldn't get 100 applicants for a role, nowhere near it. You might get 30. That's it. So it's easier to sort through 30 and pay more attention to 30 than it is for 250. And so getting credibility, especially when people don't know you, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
You got to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's hard.
It is.
I've often thought like, do I put my picture on there to grab attention?
God, no.
And we've talked about that, I know. It can go both ways, positive or negative, and what you look like has nothing to do with whether you're able to do a job. But,
yes,
it was like, well, maybe this is just a different way to stand out.
It's probably things like applying for the right jobs too. I think you lose credibility applying for the wrong jobs. There's a lot of that. There are different reasons behind that, probably not for this podcast, but people will sometimes just chance their arm because it's easy to.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to walk into an agency to talk to them and have a conversation with them, or you don't have to fax. If you had to fax a resume over for every job application, you would damn well make sure it was relevant. But because it exists digitally and you can just quickly go 1-2 clicks, away it goes, you can sit there and apply for about 100 jobs in 2 hours. No problem. And people do that because if for various reasons, if they're not in work, they have a different need. That need is, I need a job. So they chance their arm. And so the 200 applications, there may be 50 to 60 of those, which are people of that nature.
Yeah. Wow.
Right.
That's quite challenging on the other side of things.
Yes, it is. And that's just realizing how hard it is to actually stand out.
I think that's like, I feel like, and again, this might be moving off topic, but I feel like I developed quite a applying for a job, not hearing back isn't rejection. It's like, it is rejection, but I didn't see it as rejection.
Yes.
I like in some ways, like even jobs that I was qualified for, every one of them I felt like I was taking a chance by applying anyway. So
yes, you never really know what's going on though.
No.
Behind. So as a recruiter, we work very closely with the client, and to last in the recruitment industry, we're taught to ask a series of qualifying questions of the client to understand, is this something we should spend time on? Because there are companies out there who will waste our time by just wanting to see what's out there, but they won't tell us. They have no intention of employing anyone through us. They just want to see some comparable candidates because maybe their internal processes dictate that they look at a few external resumes alongside maybe looking at 2 or 3 internal applicants. So they'll engage us. And so that's why we ask, okay, well, what's the process? How many internal applicants are there? Does this job have sign off? What's the interview process? Who have you interviewed already? Who in your team could actually do this job? And are you considering them at the moment? So when you go through all that, sometimes you pick up that there may be something else going on, but anybody on the other side of a job site applying has no idea. So you may have internal applicants. The company may have decided to advertise and then they close the job really quickly because suddenly something happens. Somebody internally puts their hand up. The person who was resigning decides to stay. But the job will stay up on the job site for 28 days. And they may not take it down because they just don't have time. They forget, whatever, right? Crap at admin. Most people are. So there's also a lot of jobs out there which are not live but appear active on job sites. There's a lot of that going on. There's all sorts of things going on. So when you talk about rejection, you got to expect it. You got to almost want it. Like be a masochist and go, I want rejection because it's going to happen anyway. And about 95% of what you experience in a job search is rejection because you will only get one point of success.
Well, you don't want all of them to say yes, do you?
No, you may get 2 offers. You may get 3 offers, depending on the market you're in, depending on how good a candidate you are, depending on, where the needs are. You may get a few offers, but again, still, the majority of what you're going to experience is going to be rejection, is going to be no response, is going to be ghosting. So you've got to develop a pretty thick skin to be able to accept that and continue going through it and through it with a positive outlook. For me, like one of the things that helped negate the the detrimental feeling of rejection was that it can be luck of the draw. Someone else can be as equally qualified, capable, able, and someone just happened to see their resume before they saw mine. Yes, or they applied before.
Yeah, that's what I've been by. Like some of it's just pure luck or unluck.
Yes, it is. But because you can have 2 to 3 equally qualified candidates. And I've had that feedback before from a hiring process where we've got down to 2 or 3 final candidates. And the feedback as to the next stage of the process is we could take any one of these candidates. So it's going to come down to something else. And it could be, who's asking for the lowest salary, sadly. It could be the gut feel, it could just be a gut feel. And sometimes it is because we're employing people to work with us, 8-9 hours a day in some respects, maybe more. And we kind of want to know that we're going to get on with them to a point, right? It's not the main factor, but if you're faced with 2 to 3 equally qualified candidates, you're going to make a decision based more on personal factors than you are on critical business or skill-based factors.
And funnily enough, that is what ended up being the the cinch point for why I got the job that I managed to get.
Yes.
That in the interview, she and I had just connected so well. Like, I'm always very friendly, but there was an extra energy that we both sort of fed off each other. And, you know, by the end, I knew that, you know, as long as no one else came along that was more qualified, I had the job in the bag. Like, she liked me that much and I really liked her. So when it came to offering me the job, she had offered it to someone more qualified originally and had said to me, I'm so sorry that I couldn't offer it to you, but she just has experience that we need. That person ended up turning down the offer, and then she came back to me and said, I'm so glad I can offer you the job because of how well we had connected. So, yeah, it does. Yeah, it's funny how that does play a part.
Yeah, always. You know, again, gut feel. And there's always a big, I think, focus now especially from like HR as a division, as a vertical has exploded now into employee experience, people and culture.
Yes.
And I think HR teams in bigger businesses are having a greater influence on culture. And so hiring for culture has become a lot more prevalent. It has. So even in that respect, I've seen decisions made to hire people who have less experience. I mean, you could look at someone and say they're great for the role. And then the feedback will be, yes, they are. They could do the role with their eyes closed, but we'd rather have somebody we could maybe train the extra 30% up because we feel they'll buy into it more, they'll buy into learning. And as a culture, we're all about learning and development and so forth.
Yeah.
Look, some people think it's BS, but that happens quite a lot, especially in the mid to large companies.
Yeah. The last company that I worked for 8 years was very big on culture.
Right. And
over the time I'd been there, I'd seen that culture evolve to the direction that they wanted. And I know that even with my hiring, you know, so long ago, that part of it was, yes, I was qualified, but I was going to bring something that they wanted.
Purple hair,
some pizzazz, some like hard work, but with a smile, kind of, you know, easygoing and interactive that, you know, and wanted to engage with other people, not because they have to, because it's my job, but because I like people.
Yes.
And I did know when I was hired that they kind of wanted that in me, even though there were a lot of other qualified people because you can't teach a good personality, or you can't teach the personality that someone's looking for as easily as you can just train someone who's got the personality already and they just need the learning. Absolutely.
And it could be something as simple as understanding on a very common sense level that the role requires somebody who's very people oriented.
Yeah.
If they have a lot of different stakeholders. So if they're in a particular projects role, then they've got to deal with 8 to 9 business heads on a weekly basis and manage their expectations and influence them. You probably want somebody who is a little more of a people person, whereas if you're hiring an analyst or someone who's going to mess around with data for the best part of 90% of their day, you don't want somebody who's constantly getting up, going around talking to people or on the phone.
Cathy.
Yes, you want somebody who's a little bit more introverted, a little bit, they might call it neurodivergent, I suppose now, but somebody who is happy just to sit there and stay in their bubble and really drill down into something and understand it and make it useful. So, and that's a very basic example, but yes, I think now the nuance around what kind of personal behaviors come into play are way more relevant. I mean, we didn't do behavioral interviewing in 2003. When I first got into recruitment, it was never taught. It was starting to become a little bit more popular, but not to the degree it is now. And again, I think that's the HR influence as well.
It would have been seen as wishy-washy back then.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, I remember when it came in, we started trying to prepare candidates for behavioural interviewing. So the company that I worked for put quite a few of us on a behavioural interview training course. It might have been an internal one, actually. I think our internal training team sort of sat with us and started talking about it because it was fairly new. And so we were then asked to implement that. And so I was at the time hiring senior finance people, and a lot of these people sort of seemed not put off. They seemed too proud to kind of do. It's like, hang on, I've never had to answer these kind of questions before. I'm just very good at what I do. Here's my resume, and my outcomes speak for themselves. And some people approach it in a fairly belligerent style. So I got a lot of pushback initially from candidates, and I had to say to them, look, the reality is, if you want a job like this, or to work with a company like this, you're going to have to make a concession and start trying to understand why these are being asked. And start to put together examples, because you'd ask people about, you might get a question, give me an example of how effective you are at, using this particular system to achieve, or to influence this outcome, whatever it might be. And back then, they would just answer, oh, I'm really good at it. I use it quite a lot. I'm an expert in it, and I've been using it for 10 years. So they would often base their expertise on the number of years experience they've had in it, which wouldn't necessarily tell you how much more proficient they became in it over time. They could have just been very good at it in the first year and stayed at that level for the other 8 or 9. And the behavioral questions now really kind of dig into very specific points. So you can see whether someone was just very good at it for a year, or whether they kept on growing and growing and learning it and were able to teach other people and so forth. But there was a lot of pushback at that point, and now it's just accepted.
Yes,
everyone has to do behavioral questions. If you don't, then you've got it easy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we've come to learn that you're not just hiring a person who does a job, you're hiring a personality.
Yes.
Like with the history and everything that comes with that.
Yeah.
We're not so, I think as employees, we're not so like, I must come in and do my job. And that's evolved, that we bring a bit of our personality to work. And so the employer needing to understand how we behave in situations becomes relevant.
Yes.
Because we bring that behavior to work now. Whereas I don't think we did historically as much.
No, we never looked into personal behaviors and how they came into the workplace. So even behavioral questions now, a lot of companies will ask about how people do things in their personal life. So, obviously there's certain rules around what you can and cannot ask about someone's personal life, but you can definitely ask about how they demonstrate certain behaviors around how they achieve in their life, how they learn from mistakes, how they interact with their communities or their societies to try and improve them, how they help people out, how they react to people who are quite aggressive towards them, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So you can look at how someone behaves in their personal life, knowing that will translate into the business environment as well. But yes, we are more often than not hiring the personalities to go with the skill set.
Yeah.
But that was never the case. Many businesses would just have someone who sits there and does. Actually, one business I do work with now has quite a few people who are just doers, and they're cool with that. Smaller business, but they've got their guy in the finance team. He's been there for 20 plus years, and the GM the other day, actually, a couple of weeks ago, he remarked to me, said, sometimes I don't even know if he's in. Like he won't say hello or goodbye if he doesn't have to. He'll kind of just come up, get to his office, and he says, I almost think he looks for when certain people aren't at their desk so he can just sort of ghost past them and get out. But he does a really good job. He gives us what we need, doesn't give us any trouble, and that's cool.
Yeah. Both, it's a win-win.
It is.
I must say the two people that I work with in my current role are complete doers. And my employer is so grateful that they are. But I do know that she hired me to do and question.
Yes.
Because they, with the doers, these particular doers, there's no change that's possible.
And that's the thing, progress. So with doers, you don't often get innovation and progress. And I think that's where a lot of companies now, in much more competitive industries and competitive environments where margins are probably a lot thinner in some respects, they're always looking for that edge. So hiring people who are going to voice up and say, I think this could change, I think we could do this better, is more likely to create an innovative culture where you can find those little gains, those little minimal percentage gains to improve things, which can then rub off on other teams or other people and have a more positive impact on bottom line.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just have a team of doers, they do not want to change. Yeah. They just want to do things the same way. And
they don't understand why you would even question that that's how we do it and it works.
Exactly. But in a competitive industry, it can have the danger of rendering you potentially obsolete. And that's a hard thing. A lot of people, I think, with long careers now, sometimes struggle to get into certain roles because they may not understand that people want people who are change agents across the business, not just at senior levels, but right down to the bottom level. We want people who think like change agents.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes. Cool.
And I can see that as my strength versus others.
Good chat.
Good chat. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Shauna.
Thanks.
Hey. That was cool.
That was cool.
Yeah, that's just right. Okay, I'm just going to use that. That's fine.
Excellent. I'm going to get some water.